Welcome to Career Pod, your Audible career fair podcast. I'm your host, Dana Francis. I know being an entrepreneur is not for everyone, so that's why I was really excited when Andrea Beça agreed to be on the show. I feel like she is the go-to woman in our community when it comes to understanding and appreciating the struggles of entrepreneurs because she's living it. This was probably one of the most challenging and interesting interviews I've done to date because the conformist in me wanted to place her in one career field, but the reality is Andrea wears so many different hats. She's kind of like a modern mastermind of contemporary media. She does videography and editing, photography, story consulting, public speaking. And one thing we never really got the chance to chat about was the fact that she also offers workshops, training, and mentorship. At the time of this recording, she's 88 episodes into her podcast, That's So Maven, a podcast by, for, and about female entrepreneurs and leaders. So if being your own boss is something you might be interested in, this is the episode for you. We also chat about some of the challenges we face as women working in male-dominated fields. And we conclude with some real gems for you when it comes to life advice. This is the kind of stuff I want my daughter to know one day, so I hope you enjoy. Today we are joined by Andrea Beça. Thank you so much for joining us on the show today.
Thanks for having me.
Can you tell us a little bit about your company and what you do for a living?
Sure. Yeah. So I kind of tend to use the blanket term professional storyteller. Story is my whole life. I'm a filmmaker and photographer. And within the filmmaking box, I suppose, is writing, producing, directing, shooting, and editing. So a bit of a one-woman show, but also frequently hired to do one or more of those things at a time.
So how did you get into this profession?
Well, it's been a winding road, as I find most entrepreneurial journeys are. I have known since I was like 6 years old that storytelling was my life. I've told this story many times, but when I was in grade 1, we had a program at my elementary school where we were allowed to write, illustrate, and then bind our own book, which was super cool. I've met a few people since who have had the same experience, but for me, when I held that book, that was it. Like, I just felt like I had made it. Thankfully, that wasn't the peak of my career at 6 years old, but that completely set me on a path, among wanting to do many things, but I just always stayed incredibly interested in writing and storytelling. So all through junior high school, English was always my greatest passion, as well as things like acting and theater. And then when I was in my kind of mid to late teens, I got super heavily involved in the theater scene here in Edmonton. I started volunteering at Theatre Network at the Roxy, which unfortunately burnt down, but will be rebuilt. And then through volunteering, I got involved in Next Fest, and I started writing a lot of theater, and then I got hired by Theatre Network, became the box office manager there. So through 5 years of working there, I was, of course, completely enveloped in the theater community, meeting actors, being present at rehearsals, and just, at a small theater company, you kind of do a little bit of everything from, managing the box office to plunging the toilets when they're clogged or calling a coworker because I had no idea what the hell to do when they flooded our entire lobby, little things like that. And so that kind of started my career in theater. So at 19, I started an indie theater company kind of on the side of being in university and working full time. And I started writing, directing, and producing theater. So I did that for 7 years. And kind of in the midst of that, went to Scotland, got a master's in playwriting and dramaturgy, which is essentially script development and story development. Moved back to Canada, and within a year or so, decided it was time to move towards film because I had wanted to make movies since I was a little kid. So I had a big history with photography. My mom and my brother were both photographers, not like as their profession, but my brother was a Bachelor of Design student and is now an architect. So super artistic and creative in different ways. So I had been doing photography for most of my life, my kind of teenage years onward. So I knew how to use a camera. I was pretty comfortable with it, but I had never done moving pictures with my camera. So I bought a camera that did that, and I started making films since I was already comfortable like directing, writing. It was more just a learning curve of the process of film versus theater. And I taught myself everything from there. So I had already been shooting and editing some video when I was in theater for kind of promotional purposes. And I just dove in. And in the meantime, this is a long story, but in the meantime, sort of worked in communications. I had done a lot of, writing for social media and those types of jobs, lots of admin jobs. I worked with a research group at the National Institute for Nanotechnology, got to learn a lot about science while teaching them about writing.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, it was honestly one of the best jobs I've ever had. It was super fun experience.
The nerd in me is just like, oh, that would be so much fun.
Oh yeah, and the writing material. Don't even get me started. I loved that group. And then got into the advertising world and worked as a digital marketing person, a digital project manager with one of the biggest ad agencies in Edmonton. And in the meantime, continued to make films, make web series, and then got my first kind of professional film job in 2015 and was like, okay, this is totally what I want to do. And my friend and supervisor was like, are you going to quit? Are you going to quit? Are you going to quit? And I said, I don't have enough work to quit yet, but we'll see. That's the dream. And in the meantime, I was still doing tons of stuff of my own on the side. Like we had a web series together and that kind of thing that I was shooting, editing, co-writing, co-acting in, directing. And then I lost my job. So it was like, shitty for a day. And I realized, wait a second, this is like the clearest sign ever from the universe. So in a like 24-hour span, I built a website and became a freelancer. So at that point, I was offering a lot of different things, basically everything that was in my skill set. I was like, give me money and I'll do it because I needed to pay my bills. Maybe not the ideal way to start a career, but for me, it worked really well. It kept the fire under my butt to, push and promote myself. And yeah, it's been great. And obviously my business has evolved a ton since then. Been able to kind of narrow my services and that kind of thing, but that's where it all began.
So what would a day at work look like for you now with your company?
Well, every day is different, which is something I hear all the time on my podcast too. I think it's like every entrepreneur's day is sort of different day to day. It really depends what kind of projects I have on the go. So, a day could be anything from like a morning of admin and emails and phone meetings and that kind of thing, and an afternoon writing or in pre-production for a video shoot. A day could be a 14-hour film shoot. It could be me literally at my computer for 14 hours editing in my bubble with headphones on and my dogs. It's so varied, which is one of the reasons I love what I do. Like there's so much variety, and that was always the toughest part for me in any 9-to-5 was that, well, first of all, I like to do a lot of different things. And secondly, I get bored doing the same thing over and over again. Like having one job, like one task, rather, was always really hard for me. So yeah, it could be a bit of anything and everything.
When you say 14 hours of editing, I think the most I've ever done on the podcast has been like 8 hours straight. How do you keep your focus and how do you stick to one task for so long? Or is it just that you enjoy it so much that it's fun?
That's a good question. I mean, you have to take breaks, first of all. Although it is very easy when you're editing film to look up and be like, oh God, it's been 5 hours and I haven't moved my body. So taking breaks for sure is crucial. I try to get up and move around or take my dogs for a walk or go to the gym and, do a class or workout. The tricky part when you're editing film is that you can't work in hour increments. I mean, you can, but it sucks because you could spend a day on a minute. It's very easy and typical to do something like that. So, working for 45 minutes, if I look at my schedule for the day and I've got 45 minutes to squish something in, it's not going to be editing because there's just no point. I can't actually dive into it. So that I have to block my days out accordingly because a day of editing needs to be a day of editing. It's got to be focused. And I do love it. Sometimes it's the most tedious thing in the world, but it surprised me like way back like 7 years ago when I started editing, I honestly thought it was sort of like a means to an end and did not expect it to be, to me, one of my favorite parts of the process. So yeah, I like it. It's easy. Time flies. It's sometimes too easily. And that's when you have to like set a timer or tell your loved ones to like
check in on you.
Yeah. Tell me when it's been.
Still alive.
Yeah. Ask me if I've eaten in like 6 hours. And then tell me I have to, and not like, oh, once this is done, because then it'll be like 3 a.m. and I'm like, oh crap.
Do you have like any kind of self-care routines? Like I know for me, it's like I need to work out at least once a week. I know it doesn't sound like anything too extreme, but sometimes it's hard to even find that amount of spare time in my schedule. So do you have any things that you like to do that are just for you to help you kind of reset your brain and so you can refresh yourself? You know,
self-care is one of my biggest challenges for sure. And as an entrepreneur, like the work is never done. So a lot of my life is spent trying to, and I really hate the term balance because I don't think there is such a thing, especially when you run your own business. Like you're obviously doing it because you love it that much. So it is your life, but trying to set boundaries accordingly so that you don't go forever without taking care of yourself is huge. And it's again, like my life is so varied and dependent on what I'm doing. So for example, like I was working on a Story Hive documentary, and the Story Hive is a funding engine. It's almost like a contest in a way. You win funding to produce a piece of work, and you have 2 months to produce a 10-minute piece, which is nothing. Like it's very short. So, you know, I had a friend being like, I could never do all-nighters. Like, I don't know how you do that. I'm like, well, I do it for 3 weeks and then I don't do it for a while. And then like, that's kind of the world of filmmaking. Like you don't get to decide. So it's like, do I always want to edit for 16 hours a day? No, but if I have a deadline, it's happening. And self-care might go out the window for those like 2 weeks. And then, you know, you burn out and you cry a lot or you have a panic attack, and then you pick yourself back up again and figure out what to do to make yourself feel good again. And like, I'm just trying to be real about it because that honestly, that is how it is. For me personally, this year I have really set some goals for myself to put up a whole lot more boundaries, to say no to like a hell of a lot more things, and find some more focus on like my like emotional and physical health. I also was a fitness instructor for 5 years, so I'm aware of how that burnout is possible, but exercise is huge for me. Like I try to work out every day if I can. I might take a day or 2 off here and there, but I might try to throw in a walk with my dogs. I have 2 hyperactive dogs, so that helps. And then I would say like baths are pretty big for me. Baths without my dog staring at me are even better. Although then I feel bad. I'm like, oh, they're so cute and they're on the other side of the door. But yeah, and then time with my partner or like one of my best friends. I always disconnect during those times as much as I can. Of course, sometimes there's extenuating circumstances and I'm like, I'm going to have to take a call or I'm going to have to check on something. But for me, having quality time is huge. So yeah, like date nights and friend date nights are important to me too. It's hard and burnout is real. I mean, I from the beginning of October to the end of February, I literally didn't have a day off. So not a weekend, nothing from work, because like I said, I was working on that documentary, also running my business alongside of that. And it was a lot, and it sucks. And I did absolutely burn out. I had a total like anxiety breakdown and was like, here I am again. I have failed at this, and that's okay. I'm going to fail better next time. But it's a constant process, and it's, you know, it's got to be that progress, not perfection model, because perfection doesn't exist, I don't think.
No.
And life is always changing, right? So
if there was anything you could warn people about, like if somebody was interested in this profession, but maybe they don't have certain skill sets, what would be the warnings? Tread lightly if somebody wanted to not even necessarily be a videographer or professional storyteller. Yes, to start their own business.
For sure. You need to love whatever it is you're doing, and not just like, oh, I love that. Like, when I say that you need to love what you do, like, you need to like fucking love it, even when you hate it. And I think anyone who gets that will get it. Like, it'll click for them, because there are moments where you're going to hate it because you're tired and you know, or you feel like you have no semblance of time for yourself, and a project might be running your life, or, you know, your business in general might be running your life, which is especially true, I would say. I mean, I'm 3 years in, and I know that it's going to be the hardest, I would say, between now and like 5 to 7 years in. The goal is always like your business supports your life, not runs it. But the reality is that when you're a young business, when you're a young entrepreneur, not young in age, but like when you're new at what you're doing, it's a big job. And there is a lot of, I don't really like the word hustle, but there's a constant, like, you're working all the time, because you've got to make ends meet, and you've got to make sure that, you know, the business development is there, and you're developing a network of clients, and people are kind of learning what you do and who you are, and you're becoming top of mind for folks who need the services you offer. So if you don't absolutely love what you're doing, you're going to quit really fast when you realize, like, oh God, this is all the time. I don't get to turn this off. And you don't get to turn it off. And you don't get sick days, and you don't get paid vacation time, and you don't get to twiddle your thumbs at a desk when there's not a whole lot of work. When there's not a whole lot of work, there's no pay. So you're like, oh shit, I better find some work. So that's definitely a huge, that would be, you know, like, there's a lot of romanticized notions of entrepreneurship out there. Mm-hmm. And, you know, some of them are true when you've been doing what you're doing for like 30 years, or if you have like a stellar product that blows up worldwide or something. And like, I'm not saying it's not possible, but the reality of entrepreneurship is not like, you know, being on the beach all the time, like sipping a cocktail.
That's like the 1% versus like the rest of the 99% are, you know, working 80-hour weeks.
Totally. And it's not, yeah, it's funny. There's a lot of romantic notions of like entrepreneurship and working from home that you're like, oh, no, that is not how it is at all. Like, I'm working all the time, even when you're trying not to work. You're like, I'm just going to grab my notebook and jot this down. And then 2 hours later, you're like, okay, bedtime or something.
It's really hard, especially with cell phones, because you can reply to an email if you can't fall asleep. For me, that's the problem, is I can't put the cell phone down. Like, if I can't fall asleep, I'm like, oh, I should be doing something right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's again, kind of a constant process. For me, I personally love disconnecting from my phone. But I get it. Like, it's really easy. And that if you have notifications on, to be like, oh, I'll just look at that really quickly. It's been, I would say, a month and a half, maybe 2 months that I have permanently had my phone on do not disturb mode. And it has completely changed my life. I did it one day because I was extremely stressed out and just needed my phone to stop going off, because when it's on, it's constant. I run, like, you know, social media channels for my business, my indie film company, my podcast, and myself. So it's pretty much just like beeping all the time. And I really quickly realized, like, oh, wait a second. Unless I'm expecting a call, I can leave my phone on do not disturb mode and not get distracted by any of this ever. So that was a game changer for me.
So we've kind of been chatting about this a little bit already, but would you say that there's a potential to at least have a good work-life balance at some point in the future? Or?
Yes and no, I would say. I mean, I feel pretty good right now about work time and lifetime. Again, it's sort of project dependent. But one thing I definitely learned, so last year I had the opportunity to go to Vancouver and work on a Netflix film as a production assistant. And that was like a union job. And like I'm super aware of the hours involved in making films since I make them. Like I've done the 55 hours of shooting over 3 days. I've done that a few times. But it was interesting to be on a really large scale project and have those like 14 to 16 hour shifts every single day of a week. And I happened to be working overnights, which was intense as well. So it was, 4 p.m. to like 9 a.m., get back to the apartment, shower, eat, pass out, wake up, instantly back to set. And that's the reality of film. So how you have quote unquote balance when those are the hours that films are being made is a big conversation. And I mean, there are a lot of conversations happening about even just the like humanity of those hours, because unfortunately there are a lot of those crew positions where, people are driving exhausted, they're falling asleep, they're getting hurt. But then, bring in the notion of being a woman, and like if you're a woman who decides to have children, how do you balance that? I mean, I've even thought like, okay, so I might move to Vancouver one day, really dive into the film industry there. What will I do about my dogs? Like my dogs are at this point my children. Like they're some of the most important little peeps in my world. How will I manage being away for 16 hours a day? So it's like there's obviously a lot of conversation about especially women in the film industry, because they're traditionally the ones in the caretaking role for kids. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's an interesting question. And I think it's definitely something to consider if you are interested in working in film and TV.
It would be nice to see those dynamics kind of changing a little bit, that maybe it's not possible right now, but in the future, say if you had a partner that wasn't working and then they could take care of the dogs or they could take care of the kids. But I think right now, income-wise, it's kind of hard, because to be the primary income earner, this might just be my observations, but I feel like the industry is still very male dominated, especially when it comes to the higher paying positions. Is it changing yet? Sorry.
The film industry is incredibly male dominated, even in Edmonton. And there's an incredible and probably unbelievable to the regular person amount of sexism, which is one of the reasons I do what I do. It's guided how I run my indie film company, the same way it guided how I ran my indie theater company, which is like my entire life is basically about equality and sort of lifting up women and other marginalized folks in film, promoting diversity and inclusivity, because I face sexism all the time. I get hate mail. I get trolled on Facebook. I get just shitty comments and passive aggressive working relationships or microaggressions. It's pretty constant when you're like in the midst of the film world. And there are a lot of amazing dudes out there who I love working with, and I work with them all the time. And there's a reason I work with a lot of the same people all the time, and that's because they're not sexist dicks. So, and unfortunately, there are lots, even just locally, and it's hard. It's hard. So, yeah, I mean, things are changing for sure. Like I remember back when I was running my theater company, like there were very few women in directing roles. And now there's so many more, which is amazing. And there's like whole theater companies that are devoted to that. So is it changing? Absolutely. Not without, all of the expected bumps in the road and barriers and pushback. Like, yeah, I think we're headed in the right direction. But I mean, I could talk about that for like 3 hours. So get comfy. No, I'm kidding.
Well, I would really love to see it when it's no longer a question about field being male dominated or female dominated, when it's just we're looking at people as humans and we're not looking at the color of their skin or how they gender identify, whether or not they're part of the LGBTQ community. Like, I want to see that. And so that's why a lot of the time in my show, if I'm finding a certain profession. If that profession is male dominated, I'm going to try and find a female. It's not that I don't think there's some really amazingly, talented males in that profession. It's just I want to show people those role models and show that, anybody can do this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Well, and I mean, like, that's the step that needs to be taken. And I actually was kind of involved in an interesting conversation about this a few weeks ago, but there are a lot of folks who are like, oh, we shouldn't force gender parity or like racial parity. Like, we shouldn't force the diversity. We need to find the right people, in quotes, for the job. And what they don't realize in saying that is, like, just saying those words, you're coming from a place of like supreme privilege because you think that that's how it just works. Like, that's just a super easy thing. No, there are systemic issues that will stop women, people of color, people from the LGBTQ community from even like being considered or being known as being the right person for a job. So like forcing that, like, I don't like using the word forcing, but like making a point of having that gender parity, or like you just said, being like, this industry is really male dominated. Let's find like a woman to come talk about this. Like, those are the conscious steps that need to be taken. Right. So I'm glad you do that. Thanks for doing that.
Thank you. And it works in both directions too. Like, because the most stay-at-home parents are typically stay-at-home moms. Like, I go to these mom groups and it's like 95% female. And I know there's a lot of guys out there that they want to be the stay-at-home dads, but you got to have a really strong, solid, one person's got to have a good income in order to have that to happen in the first place. And then there's lots of other professions like nursing and dental hygienists, receptionists. There are a lot of positions that men would be suited for and probably excel in those fields, but growing up, maybe they didn't see those positive role models in those professions.
Yeah, for sure. And it's interesting. I mean, I know that you've spoken to Herman Vajegas. He was also on my podcast. He was the only man who's been on my show. But it's interesting because the difference in experience that happens for men working in a like female dominated industry versus women working in a male dominated industry is just so, like, it's so polarizing. And that in itself is really fascinating. Like, that was one thing I definitely learned speaking with him, was his experience has been one of being very welcomed in, because I find like women are generally like, yeah, cool, come hang out. Like, this is neat. We want this variety of dynamics in our workplace or in our industry. Whereas, that sort of toxic masculine ego is like, oh, hell no, like, stay away, little lady.
And it's hard when there's those social connections at work. Like, a lot of the times you find jobs through people and when you're working in a male-dominated field, it can be a little more difficult because a lot of the times the guys are going out for drinks, they're going out for wings, and they're like, do we invite the girl? Is she cool? Like, you kind of have to like prove yourself first that you're the quote-unquote cool girl, so that you can be in these social situations that help with your connections and help find other future jobs.
Yeah, being a woman or a femme identifying business owner it's like a constant practice, or not practice, but it's like you have to prove yourself like 3 times over to do anything. You have to prove yourself 3 times over just for people to believe that you own a business and you're capable of doing that. But yeah, in those situations where you have to meet people, you first have to prove that, yes, I do in fact do what I say I do. And then you have to prove that you're good at it. And then you have to prove somehow that your personality meshes with theirs or something. I kind of refuse to jump through those hoops, which, may slow my career progress. Maybe. I genuinely don't know. I don't know what the perception of me is in the industry. That's none of my business. But yeah, it's like you said, being the cool girl. It's like you're just kind of constantly having to prove yourself.
This is probably the question that a lot of people think of, but unfortunately it's going to probably be the most difficult to answer. But income-wise, what could one expect to earn on the lower end versus the higher end? And I realize 100% how complicated this question is, because, like, say if you're a filmmaker in Red Deer, you're going to be making less than a filmmaker in Vancouver. If someone was looking to get into this, I guess if you could throw out a few ranges out there, give them some ideas as to the variables that affect the wages.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, right now I'm not solely working as a filmmaker, right? Like, so in my business, I do a number of things. I freelance at, a few different services. It's hard to say what the standard income is because, like I said, I sort of built my profession around my skill sets. What I can say is that when I lost my job at an advertising agency and decided, okay, this is it, like I'm full-time self-employed, the one goal I set for myself was make at least the same salary in a year that you made at this previous job. That was sort of like, for me, that was my benchmark, my first benchmark to success. It was like, okay, if you can do this, that'll mean like you're good. You can sort of sustain, like it's sustainable. Mm-hmm. So that first year I was trying to match my advertising agency salary of $42,000 in a year. And I was successful at that. Since then, my goal has just been to increase my income every year. And I've been successful at that. The increments have been different every year. And I mean, again, you also get into that thing of like, when you're self-employed, like you got to take off your own taxes when you make income so that you can pay your taxes at the end of the year. And then of course, like I charge GST. So there's a lot of different factors versus, like what you charge and then what your like income is at the end of it. But yeah, I mean, I've been comfortably in that range for the last few years, which to me right now is success. Do I want to make more? Hell yeah, I do. And I know it's possible. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of factors that, it's especially like as a solo entrepreneur, sometimes that growth has to be slower because there's only so much business development and advancement you can do while you're like working and running your business, but then also working on your business, right? So yeah.
And we've kind of been up and down through the recessions here in Alberta. So the fact that you're seeing incline is good because at least in my industry, most of us have seen anywhere from a 5 to 25% reduction in wages and as much as a 20% reduction in hours. So for a lot of people in this province right now, it's tough times, or at least in the trades. So I'm really happy to hear that you're climbing that mountain.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, it's like part of the process too of being like self-employed is cash flow. Like that's one of the biggest challenges, right? Because you're not getting a steady income every 2 weeks. And then as you sort of move forward as a self-employed person in whatever field you're in, you learn where your peaks and lulls are. Like you learn what your busy season is versus your like completely dead season. And you can start to sort of measure, not success, but like measure how things are going based on those things. Because, for example, I've interviewed people who on my own podcast who work in like the food and chocolate industry. It's like, yeah, Christmas is it's their hella crazy time, and then Easter and things like that. For me, my busy season is usually like April to October is like when things are busier, like even more so in the summer. And my like dead time is usually, November to March kind of thing. Just to give you an example, like last year, January, I've never been that broke in my life. I had a couple of clients screw me over hardcore, which again, another lovely part of of being self-employed. You learn the hard way sometimes. And it was like, even from like studenthood, I was like, wow, I've never been this broke. And you hit those points as a self-employed person where you're like, is it over? Like, what am I going to do? I ended up picking up a temporary contract with a broadcaster who needed someone to cover pat leave. So I became a shooter and editor for them for 3 months. So coming into 2018, I was like, okay, let's do a little better than that. And it just so happened that this January I was swamped. Like I was so busy. And you still sometimes when you have those moments of like negative self-talk, you're like, oh, I'm not doing good enough, or I'm not growing fast enough, or whatever. I had to stop and like sit myself down and look at myself and be like, look where you are compared to last year. Like last year you thought your business might be over. This year you're busy. That is a sign of true success. So like just shut up and keep going. which is a huge part of also working for yourself. Lots of crazy negative self-talk. And then you're like, okay, now I'm going to pep myself up and keep moving forward.
Can we talk a little bit about your podcast? Like, where did the idea come from, and why did you feel this is important to get that voice out there?
Yeah, for sure. So it's kind of twofold. I mean, first of all, as I mentioned a few times throughout this conversation, I've always been a woman in like male, typically male occupied roles. So I've been in leadership roles my whole life, and I've always received a lot of pushback for that. So, you know, inadvertently, my whole life has sort of been about like, yeah, let's support each other, and like, let's bring women and all other marginalized folks like into the spotlight. Let's develop that equality, because it's something that's just always really, I mean, it's been a huge factor in my life. So there was that side of things. And then when I became full-time self-employed, I very quickly realized how isolating it can be. And I don't mean like really, I mean, physically, sure. Yeah, it's isolating. I'm a total introvert. So like, I know my work life is like someone's nightmare. They're like, oh my God, you're just at home by yourself and like not talking to people. And I'm like, sweet, I don't have to talk to anyone today. I do love people, but I get a nice mix, you know, between shoots and like client meetings. And then I get so much alone time that I love and value. So, but when I say isolating, I mean, all of a sudden, most of the people in my life, and like, this is not a slight at them, and like, I love the people close to me, but they didn't get it. Like, they didn't understand my life all of a sudden. And, you know, there was a tough transition of people being like, well, how come you can't hang out? Like, you're too busy for me now. It's like all of those conversations where you're like, oh yeah, like, so I'm not just like chilling at home all day. I'm actually like busting my ass, and I have to bust my ass 24 hours a day right now. And like, this is just how it is. And, you know, even little things like I can't text a lot during the day because I don't get an income if I'm not billing hours. So I can't be interrupting my billable hours with like texts for 15 minutes, little things like that. It became very apparent that I was different all of a sudden, like from the sort of 9-to-5 job. And again, it's not like there's no right or wrong or good or bad there. It was just a huge challenge. And then, you know, encountering challenging clients or high maintenance clients and not knowing how to deal with certain situations, or being in a situation where I felt like, you know, maybe I wasn't being approached or treated fairly by a client, for example, or not knowing what to charge for something, or not knowing, like, do I need a GST number or taxes? Just all of these things where all of a sudden there was no sounding board for me. And I'm lucky, like I had a couple good friends who I could sort of bounce all of this stuff off of. But I quickly realized how important it is to have a network. And so having a podcast was something that was always, like, not always, but it had been in the back of my mind for a number of years. My good friend Karen Unland had been telling me to start a podcast for years. And my answer was always, but Karen, I don't know. I don't know what I could talk about consistently. So I'm not ready yet. And she's like, okay, but just start and do it. And yeah, it was sort of like, I guess once I became full-time self-employed, I was like, oh, women in business, like this needs to happen. Let's talk about the realities of this. So that was kind of how it was born.
And it's nice. There's so many companies that, honestly, I am a huge introvert, and now being a mother, it's like almost an excuse to never leave the house. So I find out about businesses through your show. Like, I honestly didn't know about the Nook Cafe, and now it's on the bucket list of things I need to do when I eventually get out of the house. But I love it because I think it's great to support local whenever you can.
Yeah, one of the biggest compliments, or just the things that kind of make my heart swell, is that I get told a lot that people kind of use the show as like a hiring and experience encyclopedia. So, you know, I have friends and strangers who write me and they're like, this is amazing. I literally go to like yegmavens.com, and in the search bar, I type doula or cafe or writer, and I see what comes up. And I've hired these people and collaborated with them or approached them to like work together. That to me is amazing. Like that makes it feel so like worthwhile and awesome that folks are using it that way. It's great.
So this is kind of a question I've been asking everyone on the show, but do you remember what you wanted to be when you were younger? Like, obviously storytelling has been a really big part in your life, but was there any other professions that interested you?
Totally. Yeah. And I mean, and I still, like, there's still a lot of things I love. Like, I still do a lot of different things, which is cool. And I've kind of always been that way. So, I mean, when I was little, I knew I wanted to make movies. I also wanted to be an actor. I wanted to be an opera singer for a while. I wanted to be like a professional musician. I played violin when I was little. I still, like, bucket list career, want to sing in a band. So if anyone out there, like, I can sing. I have this crazy YouTube project from a few years ago if you want to watch me sing the ukulele. But yeah, it was always under the same, like, umbrella of creativity and storytelling in one way or another. That, and then, like, when I was really little, I wanted to be a vet because, like, I'm obsessed with animals, but I quickly realized that meant sick animals, and I was like, oh, scratch that off the list. Cannot cope. So, yeah.
Okay. Theoretical. But if you had the undivided attention of a high school class, what's the one thing you know now as an adult that you wish you knew back when you were in high school?
Oh my God, so many things. I would say the biggest things have nothing to do with career and everything to do with self. And that would be, first of all, it's going to get better. Like, I'm a kid who dropped out of junior high and went to homeschooling because I was so badly bullied and abused that attending school became not an option for me. So it's going to get better. And also, I mean, I wish that you could just learn earlier on in life that, like, other people's opinions of you aren't your business, and that it doesn't really matter what people think. Yeah. And the whole, like, if somebody's not in the arena fighting with you or fighting at the same thing that you're fighting at, their opinions are, like, absolutely pointless. One thing, I guess, that is somewhat related to being a business owner, but I think happens to everybody in life, is that like people will always tell you what you should be doing or how you could be doing something better when they have absolutely no idea or experience in that. And it's really easy to get caught up in being like, oh, I should be doing that. I should offer that. Maybe I should do that. And then you're like, wait a second. I know myself. So I think, like, trusting yourself and knowing yourself and being comfortable with yourself, those things all come with life experience. But yeah, with high school kids, I'd be like, it's okay. You might always feel like a misfit, but you'll hit a certain age where you realize that's awesome and it's okay and you get to embrace it. And once you do, life is, like, so much better. So
once you find your people, like, I didn't find my people till art school, so this wasn't till college, and I just didn't realize that, you know, people could share the same opinions, or that being in, I would say in high school for me, I had a few friendships that I would consider verbally abusive to a certain degree.
For sure.
That, you know, people just putting you down, and it's like, maybe they're your friends, but it's like, I wish I could go back and tell myself that, you know, it's better to be alone than it is to be with people that bring you down.
For sure. Yeah.
You know? And you'll eventually find your people. I know it's hard to believe sometimes in high school, especially when you're being bullied. It seems like every single day, it feels like time has come to a stop because life is just so cruel sometimes. But I really relate to that. And I thank you for that advice.
Yeah, for sure. And I think beyond finding the people that accept you, like, you find yourself. And I think that is the most important thing, is finding yourself and accepting yourself sort of wholeheartedly, and knowing that it doesn't matter, you know, how awkward you are, or how tall you are, or what color your hair is, or how, like, thin or fat you are, or, you know, like, what you look like, or what color your skin is. Like, being able to just find yourself and know yourself and be, like, super in that and okay with it, even on bad days where you're like, ugh, I kind of hate myself, but I love myself. You know what I mean? That's so important. And I think it's like a huge turning point in life. And unfortunately, I think it only comes with time. It's like one of life's cruel truths. But yeah, knowing that that's coming, I think is is a good thing. And when you're young, you're like, whatever, no, it's not, that's not true. Nothing's ever going to be good. Life is drama. But then, you grow up and you're like, oh, wait a second. That's life.
I feel like some people are afraid of turning 30 or 40 or 50, but I was like, man, every single year of my life has just gotten better. And now I'm in my mid-30s and I can't wait till my 40s because I only see it as like things are going up, because once you start embracing and loving who you are, life just gets better. Totally.
Yeah, I know. One of my friends just the other day was freaking out about turning 30, and I was just like, no. I've never understood that. Like, I definitely remember being younger and thinking 30 was old, like thinking that would be like life is over at that point. But as it, like, every year that it's, that it approached, and like every year since, like, I'm turning 32 this year, it's like, it's awesome. Like, you couldn't pay me to go back to my 20s, never mind like being a teenager. That was the worst. And it's just, like, I think life just continues to get better the more comfortable you are with yourself, and the more you kind of feel established in life and in who you are. Like, yeah, bring it on. I refuse to fear that.
Oh, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your wisdoms. How could people get in contact with you if they wanted to find out about the work you're doing, or maybe to hire you as a freelancer?
The best way to find me is through my website. So that's andreabeça.work. And from there, there's links to, my indie film company, my podcast. There's ways of contacting me. So that's kind of the central hub. That's the best way to reach me and kind of see what I'm all about.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks so much for having me.
I love Andrea's advice because I feel it really speaks to and empathizes with youth. If I was to flash back to my high school years, to be completely honest, I was more invested in my relationships with people than I was with my studies or career ambitions. High school is tough for a lot of us. It's really hard to escape without some scar tissue. So I appreciated that Andrea was able to share that, because I think it's something a lot of people can relate to. We will be linking in the show notes to Andrea's website and podcast, so you can venture out into the interweb world and let her know what an amazing job she's doing. This week, I have a little bit of homework for you. I want to know what you love about yourself. Maybe it could be as simple as you saying out loud, "I love my smile." If you'd like to let me know what's that one thing that makes you so uniquely you, please don't be shy. You can find me on Instagram and Twitter. Just search CareerPod. Thank you so much for joining us today. Till we meet again, stay passionately curious.